So, hello, welcome to an episode of Beam There Done That. I am Alan Wyma, and today I'm with my co-host, Francesco Cesarini.
Hi, Alan. Long time no see. So I'm Francesco, also co-host. And yeah, really relevant topic today. So for years, the Beam ecosystem has benefited from being a relative, backwater for security research. Too niche, to attract attackers, and too quiet to attract standards. We used to refer to it as a security by obscurity. This has changed big time, thanks to AI and especially this year when Peter Ullrich at ElixirConf a couple of weeks ago ran a $10 experiment, and he found a vulnerability which could crash the Beam with a 13 character string, a vulnerability in one of the major libraries. Since then, he's been doing it again and again and again. And the institution, that catches what he finds is staffed by today a single person, Jonathan Machen, at the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. So we're fortunate to have them both on the show. Peter, let's start with you. Give us the version of your bio that explains how a senior developer ends up finding, 5 CVEs in less than a day. What was it, an afternoon, right?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I would say this really represents the potential that lies in AI and LLMs in general. And I think for the last 2 years, we were kind of thinking, what is the actual potential of all the hype, right? And I was also for a long time on that level or on that train where I was like skeptical whether AI is really going to change stuff or replace us all. But yeah, so at the conference in Malaga, a lot of people spoke about Mythos, the new Anthropic model, and they were kind of afraid of it, that it will hack everything and find every vulnerability. And I thought, well, let's just put it to the test. We already have Opus 4.7, and I had a subscription, so I could just take a library, download it from Hacks, and have Claude run over it. And I was astonished that within like 30 minutes, I had the first, as you mentioned, vulnerability in Decimal, which was just like, yeah, you put this number in and the whole application crashes. And it doesn't matter whether it comes through a web form or a CSV that you upload, right? As soon as you do like 1 to the power of 10 million and you add 1 to it, the application's gone. So yeah, that was my kind of moment where I realized, damn it, there's really something here. And the thing what you mentioned is like, I have no experience in security whatsoever, other than making sure that my applications have authentication permissions, that kind of stuff. But I never looked at it from that angle, and out of a sudden I found myself very much looking at every application in this way, and it's been interesting. But also it's really only possible because I have Claude, or generally an LLM that is very powerful, at my disposal, because I know nothing about this. But I kind of know how to instruct it, how to manage it, how to also communicate with other people. So I kind of see it as the great leveler, maybe. Out of a sudden, even though you haven't spent 10 years in the security industry, you are able to just go in and find something. And just to round this off, like, this is not only, this power I don't only use for the negative or for the bad things, I also use it for the very positive things, which is that I also contributed to the Elixir language for the first time in a meaningful way after being working with Elixir for, I don't know, 7-8 years by now. And the only thing I ever contributed was maybe a documentation change. And now with Claude, I can just go in and say, hey, find performance improvement, in the language. And then me and Claude Opus, we go through it, we benchmark it, we change the function. And if it looks good, I submit it and have Jose review it and tell me whether it makes sense or not, right? So even though, again, I also never saw myself as an Elixir contributor, because I always thought, that's just something for people with massive brains and IQs above 200. Out of a sudden, I found myself also just, sending pull requests to Elixir language. And so that is, again, another angle on this LLM discussion.
So we will, here and after in the show, refer to that moment where you found that bug as the moment. And the swear word doesn't come from me. It actually comes from Claude, who helped prepare, for this episode. So we will blame the LLM for swearing. And yeah, Alan, hope you can, put in beeps where appropriate. So Jonathan, the same question from your end. Give us the version of your bio which describes how someone becomes the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, of the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, or any open source software foundation for that matter.
Sure, yeah. Thank you as well for being here. This is great. I started working at a consultancy, what was this, 12, 13 years ago, using Elixir. So quite a long time in the ecosystem at this point. What was it, 5 years ago or something like that, I started volunteering for the security working group at the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, together with lots of other people. And we were talking about things like the CV numbering authority and also other topics like OpenIDE and lots of others. And around 1.5 years ago, so January 2025, I actually started as the CISO of the foundation. And this was made possible by the board finding a very generous sponsor, Hermann Ultraschall, a German company producing ultrasonic welding machines. And they're actually doing that with Elixir as well. And in Europe, there's a new law coming up, or the law is already in place, it's just not fully in effect yet. It's called the Cyber Resilience Act, that creates a lot of uncertainty, and also requires a lot of tooling. And that's kind of what kickstarted my role, and also that sponsorship that let me do this job.
With both of you, especially Peter being quite recently, you have these, as we call it now, the OFAC moments, right? Do you kind of talk about, your first kind of OFAC moment when you kind of found something that, you were, totally surprised about and it really shocked you, and you had to probably, check it 5-10 times to make sure that you found what you found was actually what you found?
Yeah, that's true. And it surprised me how easy it can be sometimes to just crash an application. I mean, this was a very much you just provide one input in a like a price field on the website. Like I want to sell something, and I just say, oh, the price is 1 to the power of 10 million, because that is what every QA engineer would do. But the LLM just did it for me automatically. And then all of a sudden, the whole application uses like 8 gigabytes of memory. And you're like, hang on, that's not right. So yeah, that showed to me, because previously I also thought vulnerability research and security research, it is a very sophisticated science, which it is, but also there are so many easy, things that you can do wrong. And especially with the Beam, like there are a couple of aspects that you always have to keep in mind when you write your application. So we can also talk about that in a bit. But yeah, they're very easy things to do wrong. And if they're in your application, you might not notice. And even the user might not notice unless somebody, just plays around and does malicious stuff on your website. But generally it's fine. Even if your application crashes, like you just restart it. And if the user hasn't done it on purpose, they will not do it again, maybe. So yeah, this approach with the LLM just showed me that there are these obvious, more or less, problems that doesn't require you to have a PhD in cybersecurity to find an exploit. So that showed me it's kind of, again, like an engineering problem where you can everyone can just build a very simple website, right? And everyone can now also find these very simple vulnerabilities and exploit them because of LLMs. They made it possible. So that was the realization in that moment where I realized, it's not all about memory corruption thing in the Linux kernel, where people get remote code execution abilities through super sophisticated cyber attacks. Like, yes, these exist, but there are so many more simple exploit. And, the LLM just finds them for you. I think that is where the LLMs, they will come in and, either you defend yourself against that and fix these issues before, or they will just roll over you and your application will always crash because they will just automatically make it crash.
So Peter, take us back to ElixirConf EU in Málaga this spring. You ended up hacking away a whole afternoon, whilst others were going to the beach or visiting the Picasso Museum. What were you actually trying to do that day? What was the experiment?
Actually, it was because the Alembic guys, they invited us, like 3-4 people, to come to their apartment and just hang out. So we had some lunch, and then after lunch, we were all just hacking on our own little projects together. And yeah, I had that question in my mind, how dangerous, quote unquote, are LLMs really? And what can they find? And do we have to wait for Mythos to start finding vulnerabilities, or can we also do something right now? That was basically the question I wanted to answer. That's why I started hacking on that afternoon.
Before we go into what you found, can you walk me through that actual moment? So you're in the apartment, the laptop's open. What were you literally typing or running?
First, I remembered from the conference that somebody told me that Anthropic also did some security research with Opus, and they just sent the a library or a project file by file. So one file at a time to Claude and have Claude find vulnerabilities in each file. Somebody told me that, and then I read up on that. There's a blog post about it that kind of mentions it, not super clearly, but it's, in somewhere there described. So I realized, okay, I just need a bash script, really, just a simple script that finds with the regex all the .ex files in a project, and then it calls Claude, with the prompt and the file path or the file contents. I'm not sure which one it did. And I had Claude write that for me. It's a simple bash script. And I told it, if you find anything, write it to this markdown file. So like one markdown file per library, so to say. And then I just let it run for 10, 15 minutes. And out of a sudden, I first analyzed the decimal library because I just went to Hex and I sorted by most downloaded libraries. And I just picked the first or second, which is decimal. So I started with that. And within 10, 15 minutes, there was a new line in the markdown saying, hey, if you enter this number, everything goes boom. And then I just opened an IEX terminal and I entered it and I saw my memory spike at 8 gigabytes. So that was kind of the moment. And to be honest, everyone around me, they were...
No. This is exactly what I'm asking. So you get that result on your screen. Everything crashes. The decimal, crashes the beam with a 13 character string. What's the next 30 seconds? What went through your head right there and then? And then what you were about to answer, what does everyone else around you actually say? And how do they react?
I was excited and afraid at the same time. I'm not sure what the word for that would be. Probably in German we have a word for that. But I was excited because it was such a cool finding, but also it was frightening because two things were validated. One of them is that LLMs are able to find these vulnerabilities for cheap and fast and automatically. And the second thing is that there is a really severe vulnerability in decimal, which is used by so many libraries, right? Every database library uses it. Money uses it. So decimal is the most used or one of the most used libraries in the ecosystem. So there were the two feelings for myself. And it was kind of like, I couldn't believe it at first, but then, trickled in the realization. And I shared it with my colleagues, but to be fair, they were also all hacking on their own stuff. So there, and I still remember Gus Workman, a nurse guy, very nice person. He was hacking on his own thing, and he was also having these oh shit moments because he just created a new application for Nurse where you can hook up your device and you have a nice very UI that with which you can flash the device. So he also had all these moments by himself already where he was really excited about something, and then I came and said, "Hang on, we have this massive vulnerability," and also I think everyone around me there first didn't really realize what it meant. Same as with me, I was like, well, okay, you just enter something and something goes broke. But then I think a little bit the realization came in. But again, everyone was also working on their own things, so I didn't expect anyone to jump up and scream and jump off the balcony or something.
We got the story about on the ground, what actually happened, right? Where what prompted this whole entire discussion, your process in finding it, you actually finding it, you're reporting it to some people around you probably to get the the verification. But then, let's get down to brass tacks, and, we have our other guest over here who's probably feeling a little bit lonely. I would like to hear from his side, right? When, what happened? I think you were actually on the way to a holiday, right? Maybe you can kind of start to tell your side of the story.
Yeah, on that same Sunday, I believe it was, I was actually flying over to Porto, and I planned to spend a few nice days in Porto and around Douro Valley. I spent a lot more time on my computer than I originally intended, but all the reports I got, especially from Peter, were very good quality, and so there was a lot of stuff that I actually need to act on. And generally, when I get a report, the first question is always, is this actually a vulnerability? We also get people reporting just standard bug. Luckily, not that often, but we first have to figure out, does it impact confidentiality, integrity, or availability, which is kind of what defines that it is a vulnerability. And if it does, we have to figure out how to contact the maintainer if the maintainer didn't request the vulnerability by himself. And that's also a whole process. A lot of projects do not have any security documentation. They do not have private GitHub reporting active. They didn't write an email address anywhere. And so we have to figure out how we can establish communication with the maintainer. And once we figured out it is vulnerable and we can talk to the maintainer, then we inform the maintainer about the process. We help them define all the vulnerability field. We can help with writing patches, validating these patches, and all of those kind of things. And all of that work happens in private. So yeah, we collaborate on that until the patch is ready. The CVE is defined. Often an advisor is also defined on the maintainer side. And essentially, once all of that is ready, we release everything. And on the CVE side, we release the CVE into CVE.org, which goes into the CVE database. And we also publish it to osv.dev, which is a vulnerability database specifically tailored for open source package manager packages. And once that happens, also HexPM will start picking it up. This is a quite new feature, so it will show it in the UI. And very, very soon, the PRs are merged, but there's no release yet. It will also show up in the CLI once you install a vulnerable package. And yeah, that's, I think, the end of one CVE disclosure at this point.
I kind of want to talk about not every maintainer may be, maybe, I mean, there's different things that can happen, right? One is that they may be in denial. They may think that it's not their problem, et cetera, right? If there happens to be like a maintainer who doesn't want to, work with you or whatever, like, is there ways to mitigate this? Because I believe I've seen different versions of libraries on Hex that it's, say, like yanked for different reasons, right? Can we actually overstep them and talk to, say, Eric or somebody else who actually is working on Hex and say, hey, can you at least mark this with maybe with like a, I don't know what you call that, something like a warning to people to say, hey, this version may have, blah, blah, blah. Like, how can we help to do things if, say, the maintainer is even not so responsive, or even come back to another way, right? A lot of packages do end up getting, non-maintained. So what do we do about in this situation? I'd like to hear about, what can we expect?
So there is basically when a maintainer for the first time receives a vulnerability, the usual response I get is a bit of panic and very often also shame. They're ashamed that they produce something that has a vulnerability. And I think this is the completely wrong take. And I did a whole talk series on that as well, on how you go through this process as a maintainer. And I've published CVs for myself in code I wrote multiple times before. And I don't think this is anything to be ashamed of. And Peter's work is also showing it. We find this in libraries in our ecosystem that have been done by very good maintainers that take care in their work, but things just slip through and you don't think about all the ways how you can use a library and all of these kind of things. So I think it's really important to get rid of that shame and instead take pride in doing that whole process correctly. As for the retirement, we thought a long time about the retirement field, and there's a lot of discussion around the retirement field if somebody thinks something is grave enough to warrant a retirement or not, and there's a lot of discussion involved. We decided to just not work with the retirement field at all. The new way how Hex does it is actually a separate vulnerable field where you actually have linked advisories. And it will not matter if a maintainer retires a release or not. That is still in the control of the maintainer. However, the vulnerable flag, that comes in from the external data sources that mention a specific package. And the process there is kind of the other way around, because the advisories are there to protect the users and they're not a tool directly for the maintainer. However, if a maintainer disagrees, you could open a dispute, which would then also be logged in these advisories. So it would say that an advisory has been disputed. We can also put in a reason of why a maintainer does disagree. But yeah, that luckily hasn't happened so far. On unmaintained libraries, I think it's quite a different process also for the CNA. So if you find something in an unmaintained library, and we have seen that with the Dropbox maintained eSAML library, where we wanted to report the vulnerability, and instead they just yanked the library out of GitHub. They just deleted the repository, and we never heard back. And same also if something has bugs on HexPM and you just can't reach the maintainer. You can absolutely write to the Hex team and be like, I would like to take over this project. And they will reach out to the maintainers if they can and see if that's all right. And obviously, if they also get no reply, then at some point you forfeit the control over that library. The biggest part with that is we need to establish trust with the new maintainer, and we also have to find the maintainer to begin with. And that's the biggest part, and not the actual process of handing it over.
Peter, what's also very interesting too is that I think in most situations, you go through this process, it requires a lot of work. I mean, you're pumping your own cash into this, right? And, most people I think would probably have a break and just kind of celebrate, pat themselves on the back. But you kind of just kept going, right? I remember on LinkedIn, I kept seeing you popped up with another one. I was like, I think I made a comment, and I hope my comment wasn't, a negative way you received it, but it's more so like, wow, again. To be honest, there was a time when I was like, oh my God, which next library do I need to update, right? Can you kind of talk about, how your process of how you chose which library to scan? Were you expecting there to be another vulnerability? Talk more about this.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, also my apologies. But also I'm in the same boat. So whenever there's a CSV release for a library, I also have projects that most likely rely on them, and I have to update all the libraries myself as well. And yeah, I think the reason that there were so many CVEs of libraries that everyone uses is because I started at the top of HexBM most downloaded libraries. And then you get Decimal, you get Bandit, you get Phoenix, Postgres, these kind of things. So that's also, when I found those first, and now I'm actually much further down the line. And I still find a lot of vulnerabilities. I mean, I think we have at least like 10 times as many. I mean, I found probably 10 times as many vulnerabilities as we published. And I think I've reported twice as many as we currently publish. So it's, there is a lot of stuff still happening and also coming, but it might not affect that many people anymore because, we kind of work through the top libraries, but that doesn't mean that we are completely out of the woods yet. So that is basically how I'm currently still working on it. And it's also a little bit of a race against time. I don't expect our ecosystem to be like, completely attacked by all the malicious actor in the market or in the world, right? I mean, I feel they rather focus maybe on the NPM, the JavaScript ecosystem. That's where I see more of these sophisticated attacks. And in the Erlang, in the Beam ecosystem, we have the advantage of being a little bit smaller, but doesn't mean that we are, less vulnerable. So that is kind of my current goal. So over the next 6 months, 12 months, I just want to go through all the libraries, report all the vulnerabilities, and, apologies to Jonathan already up front. Like he will have a lot of work with me, but he's also a good sport and he's super helpful in this. So I'm very happy to team up with him on that. And before we go to the next question, I would like to reiterate one thing that Jonathan said, which is, I think, extremely important, because I also felt this way when I did the first reports, which is you feel bad that there's a bad thing that you have to report. You have to go to these people and say, I know you spent so much time on this and you did a great job, but there is this massive vulnerability that can just take down any application that uses your library. It really feels bad. But then after you've done that enough times, and also after, one of your reports was released and there's a fix for it, and I found myself not upgrading right away to the latest version of Bandit. I just waited a week because it wasn't, I knew my application could be crashed at any moment, but then I just restarted and I upgrade the version, I restart the application. So after like the first initial reports that I made and then the publications of those, for me also that kind of took that drama, the badness out of it. I'm not sure what the word for that would be, but the load, the heaviness of the topic. And now I just look at it like bugs. It's just like a bug. It's more than a bug, right? It's not just a bug, but in the end, it is a bug that you fix with code and you release a new version, and the world moves on, right? So that is step one. It is really not as bad. Yes, it will be some work and a lot of work potentially to fix this bug, but in the end, it's a bug. Second of all, just because your library has a bug or a vulnerability in it, it doesn't mean that you're a bad author. I found vulnerabilities in libraries that were written by José Valim. Unless you want to, like you think that you have to be better than José, your library will have vulnerabilities. It's just how the world is. It's just the reality of things. And it's just like bugs. You write libraries, they have bugs. Yes, they also have vulnerabilities. And then you go out, you fix them, you release a new version, and the world moves on, right? So that, I want to put that up front. Like, just because I come to you and say, hey, there's vulnerability, don't panic. It's fine. Let's work on this together. In a day or two, the release will be out and the world moves on. Yeah, I just really wanted to. And the last thing is, I really want to thank the maintainers, because my work is just pointing out things like bugs, vulnerabilities in this case. And I helped you with the pull request if you want me to review it, right? I'm here, and Jonathan as well. We're here to help you and guide you through the process. But in the end, it's the maintainers who have to do the actual work and find the fix for it, release it, that kind of stuff. It's and I went to libraries and I really felt bad about the numbers of things I reported. Like in Bandit, there were 7 pretty big vulnerabilities, and Matt has been absolute brilliant person, working with us to fix all of these and releasing them. And now, we're good on the Bandit side for now. We will rescan it in a couple of months and find other stuff maybe, but the biggest holes, I think, are fixed. So that's just want to say, like, thank you very much to the maintainers, and my apologies that I give you more work, really.
Thanks, Peter. So in your article, you put a number on finding these vulnerabilities that stop me cold, $10 to $30 per scan. Walk us through that. What does money actually buy, and what does it mean for the threat model of every open source ecosystem? So not just ours.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest change now, because previously, if you wanted to find vulnerabilities, you had to pay people to, read through the code, think about the library as an attack vector, like to find vulnerabilities in a library. And yeah, you had to basically pay people to do that work. And these were very few, and I guess also highly paid people, unless you were in certain countries where you just had plenty of those, that were wanted to work for you for little money. But yeah, it was very much a question of how much human capacity do you have. And now it's just a question of how much money do you have, and how many cloud subscriptions can you buy, and how many API tokens can you pay for. And it's very much automatic. Like, my whole setup is very automatic. I just have it running in the background, scanning libraries, fetching them from hacks, and writing me the findings, and then I have to go in and verify it. I write a proof of concept script. I make sure that it's actually a vulnerability, that I don't report something that is actually, I always want to report something that is high quality and actually is a problem. I don't want to waste anyone's time, basically. But yeah, still, like, I can do that work, by myself, and I scanned like hundreds of libraries, right? So that is now the difference. Like, it became automatic. You can scale it up by just paying more. It's relatively cheap still, right? I mean, a scan for like $10 of a major library, that is nothing. So I think that was the biggest change in the last year.
So I want to ask you the obvious question. You're not being paid for this. You have a day job, you have a family, I presume a life, even though you prefer, hacking an afternoon instead of visiting the Picasso Museum and going down to the beach in Malaga. But, I guess it's priorities. Why are you spending your weekends, scanning hex packages on your own dime? What happens if you and people like you stop doing this?
I hope not all of us will stop doing this. I mean, I certainly don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Yeah, I'm just also a workaholic to a certain point. I just love playing with my own projects on the weekends and writing blog posts and that kind of stuff. So that is my kind of hobby. Yeah, I for me, it's also really exciting, and it's a different angle onto an ecosystem that I have been a part of for the last 7-8 years, right? I always use all these libraries, and now I look at them from a different angle. I also learn much more. I mean, working with Jonathan helped me and taught me so much about the security side of things, the whole CVE process. I also get to interact with all these amazing maintainers and authors of these libraries, and I get to work with them to help them fix their library. So it out of a sudden, it really put me in touch with many, many more people that I previously have never had contact with. And in the end, I also see it as a kind of like a public service, really. Yeah, I don't get paid for it until today, really. I only paid for my own cloud subscription, and worked weekends and nights and holidays. And yeah, and I have a day job next to it. Luckily, my co-founders and co-workers, they're also understanding, and still I get everything done there. But yeah, I have to. It's not my main job doing this kind of stuff.
It's a community, it's an ecosystem, everyone's there to help each other. So, Jonathan, on your end, when Peter started sending in finding after finding, what did that do to the CNA you just stood up? Because the EF, became a CNA in 2025, and Peter's campaign hit you in early 2026. So, is this a system which is being stress tested in its first year of operation? What did it actually look like?
Yeah, it definitely is a stress test at the moment. When the findings started coming in, I was at first a tiny bit hesitant because you can see a lot of AI slop as well. Like if you give an AI the wrong prompt, it will find a lot more vulnerabilities than actually exist. But Peter has been a very good sport, and the stuff that reaches me is generally very high quality. And so luckily I didn't have to worry about that. And at this point, it shifts to we're actually doing real problems. No matter if an AI found it or a human, it's the same problem, anyways. And it's very important that we look at those because that's exactly what the CNA is intended to do, to communicate to users of libraries if they're vulnerable or not and what they need to do to not be vulnerable. But yeah, it was a huge stress test. We started around, what is it, April 2025. And essentially in 2025, we did something like 9 vulnerabilities over, yeah, essentially the whole year. And there have been days in recent weeks where I filed more CVs than I did in a year before. And we started the CNA together with 3 people. So there is Bram, he's the chair of the security working group. There is Ingela, which works on security and the TLS stack in Erlang. And there is me. And since I'm being paid at the EF to do security work, I did most of that work. And Bram and Ingela were mostly reviewing and giving their side of things, their view onto problems. And this is kind of how that collaboration worked. But obviously, if I now show up with not one vulnerability at a time or two, but with 10 or 20, then yeah, this kind of skews of how that worked. And we certainly also had to make some concessions to the volume. So I don't have the same amount of time to deal with a vulnerability as I had before. And I think we were able to keep the quality of the CVs good, but certainly, yeah, we don't have exactly the time anymore that we had before, and yeah, we need to work on making that process more efficient to work with more people and that kind of thing. But so far, it's holding up.
From what I'm hearing, we have a handful of volunteers holding the line, which is not a sustainable model, but it's a model we have right now. So tell us about the institution. So the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, the CNA, the Aegis Initiative, because all of that exists, to turn what you and Peter are doing as individuals into something the whole ecosystem, can and has to rely on.
Yes, I started the Aegis initiative in early 2025, and it has 2 primary focuses. One of the focuses is the regulatory side, so making sure you can write law compliant software in the EU. So if you, I don't know, sell an ultrasonic welding machine, or I don't know, a Hoover that has Elixir inside, or any other product really for the European market, you need to comply with the law. And the law requires some level of insight into your application, for example, doing SBOMs, and you have to do certain kind of due diligence on your dependencies and those kind of things. And the second focus of the initiative was certainly on the supply chain. So both securing like publishing workflows, or so that you can find out if you have CVEs in your software, account security like 2-factor authentication, and yeah, very broadly on supply chain security. And yeah, the CNA, the CVE numbering authority, was one of the earlier projects we took on because it was, let's say, relatively easy to get into place. There's just a bit of bureaucracy and red tape to jump through, but otherwise it's not too hard to set up. And we could immediately see an impact of, for example, the OTP vulnerabilities that we disclosed last year. We're able to put more details into the CVEs than GitHub, for example, did before, which is, by the way, also doing a brilliant job on that front. But yeah, it allows us to add more metadata, to control more what we actually disclose. That will also allow it in the future to be read by more automated tools instead of humans. And so, yeah, that's why we started the CNA.
What can individuals and companies do to help?
I think at the moment there's a very, very simple answer to that. You can either give the EF money so that we can continue doing that, or if you have an employee or somebody that likes this space and wants to get involved in it, if you, I don't know, for example, can dedicate somebody with a 50% position or something like that to do help, we'll be happy to take that as well.
Jonathan, I'd like to kind of go over the process of what we should do, right? Because what's interesting about this whole thing is that GitHub already has a way that we can start to report vulnerabilities, right? And I would like to kind of talk about, because right now both of you you're just two people, right? If everybody, saw this example and started going crazy and just scanning everything, let's say we start finding lots of vulnerabilities. Some are maybe false positives, some are real. Now, should we be going to GitHub and using that report mechanism? Or should we reach out to you first? I mean, do you mind to kind of talk about what's the proper way to do this? So that way, we're doing everything the proper way, whether we found something or not.
Generally, our preferred way is that you reach out to the maintainer according to his security policy, if there is any, and basically loop us in from there. The best way really to do that is if a project has private vulnerability reporting active on GitHub, then you can essentially report your vulnerability there, and the maintainer can then just invite the people of the CNA as collaborators into that advisory, and then we can collaborate on GitHub. However, a lot of projects don't have this enabled. They also didn't put up any other contact methods or anything like that, so it's really hard to reach them. In which case, just send us an email at cna@erlf.org. And we can also collaborate with the Hex team, for example, to look up an email address that isn't public or stuff like that, and we can try to contact that maintainer via some more channels than are publicly accessible. So yeah, generally follow the security policy of the project if there is any, and if not, just fall back to sending it to us, and we're going to do our best to figure out where we can send stuff.
Now, Jonathan, what, as if there's a Hex library maintainer, right, listening to this podcast, and they're afraid that they're going to be scanned next and find some kind of great vulnerability, what should I be doing, right? Should I actually maybe take the initiative to scan it myself? Should I start to see what's been reported recently and see if I'm following the same path? Or should I just wait for somebody to kind of find what's going on? Or what do you recommend for current maintainers of libraries out there?
I generally support projects just raising their security posture. And what that means is to just think about things around security. So exactly writing a security policy, putting up that private disclosure thing, using some linters like, for example, Credo to find common like string to atom conversion and these kind of problems. And yeah, if you do have access to a good model, there are some good tools out there as well that instruct the model, like for example the Linux Foundation's Scrutineer project, where you can just plug in your Claude subscription and you can scan a project. I would welcome you to do that as well, because you, as a maintainer, you always know your project the best. And if it spits out 10 things and you know that 5 are completely unrealistic, this is a very quick thing for a maintainer to triage, which is going to take us more time. So yeah, if you do have access to it and you want to prepare, please do. If you do find problems, I would really appreciate it if you still went through the whole advisory route, so reporting that vulnerability and not just silently pushing out the patch, just because if there is no vulnerability, then people that are on older systems will just not know that they're still vulnerable and they're not going to patch. And so this is an important part of that process. And I'm pretty sure in the coming months that all of this tooling is going to further improve. And I would guess pretty soon we're going to have things like GitHub Actions that runs a security scan of the latest changes or something like that for an AI as well. I'm sure pretty soon there's going to be AI tools for your CI as well, so you can scan the changes of your projects while you're doing them. But in the end, just raising security posture, thinking about a threat model, thinking about security policies, just trying to do your best is really all you can do.
I'm kind of curious now because this is kind of, well, I want to say almost revolutionary, but it's actually not really revolutionary. People have been doing this for some time since AI started coming more into the picture. Should the EEF actually dedicate a portion of their budget to doing something like this now that we actually have something proven, right? So many CVEs discovered in such a quick time with, quick time meaning a couple of days, that maybe we should actually dedicate some budget to doing this ourselves. So what do you think about that? Has this been proposed or thought about?
You're asking if the EF should have a budget, or are you asking why the EF is even doing the CNA?
Should the EEF actually dedicate a budget, from wherever, it could be part of, the security side to say, okay, we're actually going to be ourselves scanning packages rather than, having the community doing it, themselves proactively.
Okay.
Yeah.
The EF is already appointing a part of their budget, namely what we get in from the sponsorship on the security side, to actually do the disclosure side of this whole thing. I think it would be really good if we could expand that. For example, that we could pay Peter to actually do this work and do the scanning and giving him access for free, or not for free, but through the EF to all the tools that he needs to do these things. We just have to make sure that we can actually finance all of this. And at the moment, I don't think we have sustainable enough support to go out on that limb and actually afford doing all of that on top.
So if you're a CSO listening right now, please go in, contact the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation and consider donating and consider helping fund some of this work. So the CNA isn't the only thing the EEF has been building. There's the Aegis initiative, supply chain security, the HEC security audit, open chain compliance, to work with the Open Source Security Foundation. Help the listener place the CNA inside that bigger picture. What is your vision? What is actually being built?
The bigger vision is essentially that as an end consumer, you can sleep more safe and sound and basically be sure that your product doesn't contain external factors that could break your system. And we're doing that by both the contents of the packages you're doing, by scanning them, by reporting vulnerabilities, etc., but also the infrastructure that gets them delivered to you. So we want to make sure that, for example, the code wasn't altered between the repository and what was packaged on Hex. We want to make sure that if there is, I don't know, a GitHub action compromise somewhere, that as a maintainer, you don't inadvertently publish something you don't want to have on Hex. We want to make sure that if there's an evil actor doing, let's say, something like typo squatting and uploading an on-purpose malicious library, that we catch this and we can also yank out that package before it actually affects anyone. So it's really about securing all of the supply chain and allowing you insights into your supply chain so that when it reaches your projects, you can be sure that you're the safest as you can be, and that you understand what you're actually using and how all of these pieces of software connect together.
Jonathan, so you've described the real infrastructure. By sitting on this call with Peter, who's been finding CVEs faster than just about anyone else in the ecosystem in his own time, there's a gap in there, isn't it? Between what the EF has built and what the moment actually requires. So be honest with us, where is the system stretched right now?
Currently, Peter hasn't reported all the vulnerabilities just because we haven't caught up completely with everything that Peter has reported. We need to improve processes. So, for example, right now, the only way of how you can interact with the CNA itself, with the disclosure process, is if you're a part of the CNA and therefore see everything in the CNA. And we're obviously very hesitant of just inviting in 5 more people because there is absolutely no separation between what you can see and what you can't see. And this is not really what we want. To do that, we need to shift to a system that can actually deal with multiple people that basically see the stuff they need to see, and so that we can get external help to actually deal with parts of all this. And at the same time, the infrastructure we built was very well to deal with, let's say, I don't know, 5 in-flight CVEs. Essentially, what we're using is just a GitHub repository, and there's pull requests on that GitHub repository with CVE JSON. And if you merge it, it gets published, and with some further actions that then hooks it up to the website, etc., etc. The problem really is if you get to the point where there's so many CVEs open, you can hardly keep in your mind which one is which, and what you already did, and what you didn't do, and what you verified and haven't verified, and where the maintainer has some concerns, and all of these kind of things. It's just that process gets very time consuming and also quite hard to get right. And also for that, we need to improve our tooling so that we can do this and things don't fall on the floor and we forget about them, or we deal with things the wrong way. And yeah, that's really what's keeping the speed down. I don't want to take in more than we can reasonably report in a good quality. And yeah, we need to improve that process so that we can pick up the pace as well.
Peter, you're the one who's one of those whose volume is stretching the system. You're deciding not to necessarily report all of the vulnerabilities, whilst waiting for the ones you've already reported to be taken care of. What does it look like from your end? Is there a version of your work which is harder to do because of the receiving infrastructure, and because of the fact that it's volunteer staffed? And
yeah, of course. I mean, if we had a team of full-time employees at the EEF who would only do security work, yeah, that would give us much more capacity. But we also have to be realistic about this. So I think where we need to focus on next is tooling, just automatic reporting that you can, through an API, maybe submit a report to the CNA, and then inside the CNA they also have management tools to manage the process better than having a pull request on GitHub, that kind of stuff. So the tooling that is something that we need to set up, and I know that this will improve the capacity and the efficiency quite a bit because I've also set up these systems myself for myself. Right, I mentioned in the beginning, my first approach was very much a bash script that would write the findings to a markdown file, but that is already 5 iterations ago. And by now I just use open workers, that I can enqueue, and then they run the audit on a library, and they have a local system where I write everything to a database, and I can generate a report with a single click through an LLM. I can create a proof of concept script with a single click. I can score the CVE with a CVSS score. I mean, that is also something that Jonathan eventually will update. It's basically the severity of the vulnerability. It's the scoring systems. So I can do all these things with just single clicks by now. I still need to do the verification myself and see the script, and maybe it has a bug in it, so I need to fix it. But yeah, I automated a lot of the work by now. So I know that will also need to happen on the CNA side. And yeah, that is the tooling. And I think also one of the other parts of it will be the integration with Hex. As Jonathan already mentioned earlier, in the future, you will be able to see when you do mixed steps get that there are vulnerabilities in the versions of the libraries you're pulling down. That will help a lot, hopefully, with adoption of new versions. And then there's also the communication side of things, which is for Jonathan and me, it is quite hard sometimes to get a hold of the author of a library, especially if they don't have GitHub private vulnerability reporting enabled, and then maybe also that they don't have an email anywhere on the internet, and they're only on LinkedIn and never nowhere else. So that is something where I would ask, of course, if you don't want to be reached through the internet, that's fine. If you don't want to put your email anywhere out there, but maybe at least open the vulnerability reporting, and it's just 3 clicks in GitHub. And then I can submit reports to you privately, and you will get a notification. Also, you won't always get a notification, so check your GitHub notifications, unfortunately. And if I don't hear from you in a couple of days, I might ping you in a different channel. So yeah, there are a couple of things that we need to get right, but I don't see that there's a big blocker here. I think eventually, if Jonathan and I and maybe a few others, if we just make ourselves as efficient as possible, then we should be able to support the ecosystem. Ideally we would have 1 or 2 or 3 full-time employees on this, but this is just what we have to work with.
Now, Peter, I'd like to talk more about the different kinds of vulnerabilities that you've been finding. Do you find any kind of pattern, say certain types of, like the way you're writing code or the way you're structuring things, that kind of are happening over and over again in different packages that you're finding issues with.
Definitely. So one of the biggest ones is binary to term and string to atom. So if you do string dot to atom anywhere in your application, even if you think, that code will never be reached by any request or something, just make it to existing atom instead, maybe. So there, like, to atom is a big one. And actually, if you use Sobolo, if you run the Sobolo checks on your library, it will find these kind of things and flag them. And if you can, just fix them, then you're not vulnerable to the atom table exhaustion, which is probably like 20-30% of the, or maybe more than 30% of the reports that I'm reporting is atom table exhaustion. Because, there is a way of creating new atoms in your system, and I can do that through HTTP requests or input somehow. And if I do that often enough, and it's silent as well, right? I can just send you requests over days, and then on every third day, your system crashes, or on the weekend, right? So to atom is a big one. Binary to term is another one, which is really bad because I can just instantiate any atom. I can create functions, and if you execute them later, I can execute any code on your system. So binary to terms is also very, very bad. Like, really only use it if you need to. And then because I also focus most on HTTP libraries in the last couple of weeks, so I focus on Bandit, Phoenix, these kind of things. I found a lot of these where, within the HTTP, it's really freaking hard to get HTTP right, the protocol, and secure as well. Like, you can get it right, but secure is a whole nother level. And I found quite a few bugs that I reported, vulnerabilities, where you just open a WebSocket connection, and then you never send the AND symbol. Like, you just send data, and you never send finished. So the web server will just continue to buffer all the data you send it, and if you don't have a max buffer size on that, I can send you gigabytes of data, of garbage data, and also create an out of memories thing. So these are a lot of the reports I found in the HTTP libraries, and it doesn't affect all of us, but I would just say, like, if you think I'm going to create my own HTTP framework, like, a web framework, or like a request framework like Rec, maybe think twice about it. Like, it's really freaking hard to get that right.
What I think is very important too is that you've actually made these prompts available, right? You wrote this blog and you said, okay, this is what I'm using. Can you discuss about, maybe how you got to those prompts, and also where we can find those, so that way we can start to maybe scan our own?
Sure. So they are on my GitHub, and also I link to them in my blog post. And they're really like 3 or 4 different prompts I'm using. One of them is something I wrote myself together with Claude, and it's just a very simple prompt saying, find vulnerabilities, focus on these particular aspects, and especially focus on vulnerabilities that are accessible from kind of external attackers, right? Like, I don't care whether an attacker would call a function from their library into your library and then would do something malicious, because they already have sort of code in your application anyway, right? So that is not really a vector I'm looking at too much. It's more, I look at external factors, like, can they send an HTTP request or give you like a CSV or any kind of input, and call that function. So that I have this kind of like simple-ish prompt, which I use for everything, and then based on what I find there and how important the library is, I basically took the scrutineers prompts, which Jonathan mentioned before. There's a project out there that's called Scrutineer, and they have a lot of prompts. And I use the ones for finding vulnerabilities, and I run those again on important libraries, and that takes longer, like 3 times more. It costs 3 times more, so I don't run it all the time, but when I need to. Then I have a prompt which basically gives access to the entire library to Claude and tell it, hey, find stuff in it. It doesn't work that well, to be honest, but I hope that with Mythos that it will run better. So I keep that strategy. And just last week, I also experimented with Codex and the GPT 5.5 model. I don't have the cyber model. I'm not sure really how to get access to that, but I do verified my identity. So I have this like TOC, whatever it's called. I can basically run vulnerability research, or it will find more vulnerabilities, because I verified myself as a security researcher, quote unquote. And Codex itself also has a skill set called Codex Security. And that also is just, you point it at a library and you tell it to go and find vulnerabilities. I haven't tried that yet, but that's something I'm going to focus on in the next couple of weeks, because also what we've been seeing with with Claude Code is that they give you higher weekly limits, but then they take away some tokens again. Like they're playing around with the subscriptions and the limit of work you can do with it. So I want to have a second foot in the Codex world and the OpenAI world, where I can also switch over to another model if I need to, and to verify which one works better for us. So that is basically my setup. And again, at least, well, not the Codex one yet, but all the other prompts are open source. And Codex is literally just calling the Codex security skills. So there's nothing else to it. So yeah, if you want to go out and find some stuff yourself, please be my guest.
Now, Jonathan, I'm kind of curious if there is, or if maybe it's something that EEF or somebody can kind of do, is to have some GitHub actions which we can actually run on our own code that maybe can be kind of sponsored in the fact that it's been like, that we recommend this from the EEF side, that all maintainers should do something like this, which is basically, Peter's already mentioned that, using string to atom and these kinds of simple things that have been talked about many times, can we actually run these directly in our code using a GitHub action? And then that way we can kind of solve a lot of these CVEs from even being created.
That actually already kind of exists. So, for example, So Below and Credo do cat binary to term and string to atom, for example. So if you're just doing best practices and you're using the current state-of-the-art linters in the ecosystem, you're already covered by this. However, they're quite specific, so they're not like AI scanners which really understand the code. They just look for certain patterns like function calls and these kind of things. It will not catch if you let's say, I don't know, you do string interpolation for HTML templates instead of using a Hex sigil. It will not catch that because it's just a string. And if you do scan these kind of things with an AI, it will actually see that you might be vulnerable to XSS. And so, as with everything, I don't think there's a single tool that catches all of that. It's more like collection that really help getting rid of most. But yeah, if you have nothing right now, I would recommend just installing Credo, maybe So Below, and do that as a first step.
So, Jonathan, you wrote the guidelines, for library maintainers on the Beam. Peter's article was explicit. If there's one thing a maintainer takes away from any of this, what is it? Just give us a single action.
I came to the same conclusion on my talks on vulnerability management. If there's one single thing you do as a library maintainer, please prepare a security policy that includes a contact essentially on how reporter can reach you. And that's the most important first step in this kind of area.
And for the engineering leader listening, so the VP of engineering, the CTO, and or the founder is Phoenix in production, they've just heard that their entire stack depends on the CNA staffed largely by one person on volunteering time. What does that listener have to do this week?
It's very important to remember that, especially the bigger engineering firms, for example, I hear a lot of, we are buying supply chain security from a vendor. Essentially, I don't know, people pay a company like Trivi. It's very, very important to remember that the only reason these tools work is because they're getting data they can work with. And the CNA is producing that data. And so just paying a vendor is not really enough to make this sustainable.
We've named the actions, for the listener. Let's spend the last minute on, on where this is heading. So, Jonathan, you touched on the EU, CRA earlier. Peter's gestured and spoken about the next generation of LLM capabilities. Both are coming. Let's move forward. 30 seconds to each of you over, what we can expect.
I think you have to get ready for the new reality we live in. I mean, until now, we have been focusing on the efficiency of AI when producing products, but now we also need to look at them at securing our products. And I would highly recommend that you at least write a bash script that feeds your application file by file to Claude Opus 4.7 and tells it with my simple prompt, find vulnerabilities in this application. So do that, once a month, and then fix the vulnerabilities and the bugs it will find, because what I'm reporting is like 20%, 30% of what I'm actually finding. There are a lot of like medium or small vulnerabilities that are not really accessible, and then there are a lot of bugs that are not really vulnerabilities. So you will find something that is worth fixing regardless. Again, so do that yourself, the work, and then second of all, also think about how can you help securing the entire ecosystem, because the work I'm doing and Jonathan doing is partially paid. Not all of us get paid, and I will also not do that for the next 10 years. I also have other interests that I would like to follow, and eventually I might be gone, right? And then who picks up this work? And you as a company, just put down the credit card, donate some money to the EF, and then they can figure it out.
There is quite a lot to do in the space of supply chain security. Right now, I think we kind of have the obscurity bonus. So if an attacker is really looking for something, usually they focus on a bit larger ecosystems instead of ours. But I don't think that will keep for long. And the reason for that is just the costs on the attacking side, and just automating things with AI is also going down. And I don't think we can hide between or behind our obscurity for very long. And if we actually are a target, I don't think we're fully prepared yet. We don't have all the protections in place, like, for example, NPM does with like trusted publishing. And there's lots of topics where we need to improve to make things harder to attack. And to really do that, we need to scale all of this up. And this is only possible with money. And we need quite a lot of that. And at the moment, I'm mostly looking into external funding sources, things like governments or other open source foundations and stuff like that. But to make this sustainable over a long period of time, I think our ecosystem has to finance that by itself. So I want to arrive at a point where the companies making money off the beam are also contributing back to the beam to make all of this sustainable. And yeah, the only way to do that is to pick up your credit card and sponsor the EF.
Just to recap, for the last 30 years, the Beam security advantage was that it was small enough to be quiet, to be off the radar. But we were always hoping that was going to be temporary. So what Peter and Jonathan are doing is the work of building a different kind of safety, one that doesn't depend on the ecosystem you're being too obscure to notice. So we owe to both of them a big thank you, for what you've done. And for all listeners, the easiest way, to repay them is to make sure they're not alone. So, thank you both for being on the show. Just for the record, the show was recorded on May 18th, 2026.